Okay, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Give me 1 second to refresh my YouTube so I can see chat and say hi to everyone. And come on, YouTube. They're always slow. Here we go. All right. Good evening. Anna LeBaron is with us tonight. Everyone, please say hi.
Hello.
Good evening. Anna LeBaron, I am so sorry.
And
I've
all
been
my
practicing
friends
that
call
all
me
day.
Anna, so that's an important little detail right there.
Definitely.
I think we're going to be friends after this, so there you go.
All right, so we are live with Anna LeBaron. For those of you that don't know, she is the daughter of Ervil LeBaron. You may have heard me talk about the Church of the Firstborn out of Mexico and all of that mess. So we're going to get into that tonight. She's going to take your questions. I'll be reading chat. Mods, please flag up the questions for me with a tag so I can see them clearly. And we're going to get going. So Anna, I am honored to have you here. I have followed the story for a long time, and to actually get to sit and speak with you is such an honor for me. And thank you for being here.
Well, it's an honor to be here. And I love being able to share my story in ways that other people find helpful or inspiring, and in ways that will make the world a better place.
Definitely. So right off the bat, for people who aren't familiar and don't do the kind of crazy Googling that I do, what's the basic story of your father, Ervil LeBaron, and how did that all come about?
Well, my father comes from a long line of people that were practicing polygamists, from all the way back to a man named Benjamin F. Johnson, who was the spiritually adopted son of Joseph Smith. So I am a first generation monogamist person on my father's side. And in my father's world, the practice of polygamy and the status as the prophet was a huge, huge deal. And so when my grandfather passed away, there was the mantle, so to speak, fell to my uncle Joel, who was the oldest male born in that family. And they led that group that was down in Mexico, because, let me back up. My grandfather moved his family, his polygamist family, to Mexico in the early 1900s, when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints disavowed polygamy for the second time. And they said that people would be excommunicated if they were found practicing polygamy. Well, there were people that remained faithful to the original teachings of Joseph Smith. And those people who remained faithful are what are referred to as the Mormon fundamentalists. And that's how they want to be referred to, and that's how they self-identify. And therefore, I do that out of respect for them. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the modern day church. And so they want to be identified that way. And so therefore, I do that. Now, for brevity here, when I say the LDS Church, I'm referring to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So my father was born into a fundamentalist Mormon family, and eventually his brother Joel took over and was the prophet for the Church of the Firstborn of the fullness of times. And they were co-leading that group until there was a disagreement between them, and which grew and grew. And my father was the one at fault. He wanted the power, and he wanted to be known as the prophet. He was very jealous of his brother Joel. Right. And eventually my father and his 13 wives and 51 children left the LeBaron colony down in Mexico. I was 9 months old when they all left. I was born in the LeBaron and was 9 months old when they left, and they just moved to another city in Mexico and began living their lives there. When I was 3 years old, my father ordered a hit on his brother, and it was carried out by his right-hand man, Dan Jordan. So thus, when I was 3 years old, my life became one that was just on the run from the law. We moved around a lot, and I grew up all over California, the Southwest United States. We moved back and forth to Mexico. There were always a lot of people sharing a home, 2 or 3 of the wives, 15 to 20 children in a regular one family home, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and there's 25 people in the house. Craziness. People came and went in the middle of the night, especially the people that were wanted by the law, because the killings didn't stop with just that first one. Once that started, there were more and more and more of them that followed. And because I was a child, I wasn't aware of what was happening around me. And so I didn't find out till years later, till I was a teenager, of what had happened to people that I loved and cared about. And the crazy part was, it was people that I loved and cared about that were carrying out those hits that my father ordered.
Yeah, that must have been.
About.
I can't imagine the realization when it hit you when you were older. But when you were little, like 3 and 4, what was your daily life? Obviously to you it felt normal because that's how you were raised. But would you say, looking back on it now, that as much as the mothers could do in those situations, give the children a normal sort of home life?
Mm-mm.
No?
There wasn't anything normal about it. There were so many people packed like sardines in the house. There was never enough food. There was never enough clothes. We had to dumpster dive for food. I have memories of dumpster diving for food. I have memories of dumpster diving in the Goodwill boxes for clothes. There was, you didn't have like a bedroom. Like each mother would get a room if she was lucky, and usually the babies would sleep with them. All the other kids would pile up like sardines in the living room. There was a big stack of blankets in the corner. And when it was nighttime, you went and got a blanket if you were lucky, and kind of dogpiled with somebody that you weren't fighting with, and fell asleep on the living room floor at night. So that was. We weren't allowed to play outside because that many children would draw attention,
right,
from unwanted attention from the neighbors. And so when we were enrolled in school, which wasn't all the time, but there were times when we were, we would leave the house 2 by 2, just because, you wouldn't want the neighbors to be able, unless they were like really super nosy, they wouldn't know what was happening. But we definitely were taught to lie. We were taught how to lie, and we were taught that we were being persecuted because we were God's chosen people. And so all the drills that we had to go through to be taught how to respond to the police, to the authorities, to the neighbors, to anybody who was, nosy Nancy next door. It's like, who's your dad? I don't know. Who's your mom? I don't know. Like, you were just taught to, you knew who your mom was, but we weren't allowed to see who our dad was. And like, if we were asked in school, we were instructed to name our half siblings as our cousins, and my mom's sister wives as our aunts. And so there wasn't a way for teachers or even anybody who kind of got to interact with us. There wasn't a way for them to find out what was happening because we were taught to lie completely. And the lying was 100% justified in their minds.
Right.
Because they didn't answer to the United States government. They didn't answer to the police. They answered to God and to their definition of what the laws of God were. And in their minds, even using welfare fraud to gain access to government funds for feeding the bunch of kids that they had, even all that was justified. There was a phrase they used called bleeding the beast, where the more you could get from the government, the better, even if you had to commit fraud to do it.
Right. Yeah, I can almost see that pattern of thinking even in today. A lot of people think that, I'm getting money from the government. So certainly on a religious scale like that, where they don't feel beholden to the government at all.
Zero.
But at the same time, I'm like, if you got more money for food, good on you. I can see that too.
Here's my actual, like, here's what I know. The welfare, even though they were committing welfare fraud, the ability for them to go and buy food kept us alive.
Right.
And so for that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that we had even just the gross powdered milk that was disgusting. You know, it's like you're grateful to just have something. And so, you know, my mom with her food stamps, she had a bunch of kids, and she was not able to name my father as the father of her children. And so she was gaining those, you know, by lying. But there were other women who were not American citizens living with her, who all of that had to be shared. So even though they were providing enough for her children that she could claim on her applications, there was never enough to go around. We ate a lot of beans and rice and a lot of, not the day-old bread that you buy at the bread store, but after the third or the fourth day, when they can't sell it, they bag it up and put it in a big garbage bag, and they will slice open the bag because they intend for it to be animal feed.
Right.
We ate a lot of that bread.
And I remember the powdered milk.
The powdered milk, we were grateful when we found little white powdered donuts in those little bags. And when we found little chocolate ones, I was especially happy. The little fried pies, oh my gosh.
Yeah, my mother was LDS, and one of her things were, you know, the food storage was the powdered milk, and we would play with it. Cause like, what is this? This is crazy, but it was awful.
It was awful. Like that. And my mom always had to water it down because there was just never enough to go around, which made it even worse.
Yeah, I can imagine. The first,
like in my mind, I can still remember how it tasted in it. I'm still grossed out about it.
Yep. I don't want to think about it too hard because I can still taste it too. Not fun. A first question from chat. AF wants to know, was this a calling for your mother, or was she sort of hoodwinked into this relationship? How did that come about?
My mother was, my father was, you know, from a long line of practicing fundamentalists. And my mother came from the LDS side. She was raised modern day Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my father was able to show her in the sacred texts of the Mormon Church, of the LDS Church, where Joseph Smith taught that that polygamy was never to leave the face of the earth. And so with all the ways that this had been taught in the, you know, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Journal of Discourses, it was just there in black and white. And anybody that was a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was ripe for my father convincing them to join his fundamentalist cult.
Definitely. And when the church announced that they had a revelation about polygamy, the cause behind that was because they weren't being given statehood. Was it Utah, the first one that wasn't being given statehood until they renounced polygamy? And there was quite a backlash about that because that was how they thought that they should worship. And that I can see where the picking was ripe for people who were very disenfranchised by the church with that decision.
Yeah. So I mean, it's become a lot less. I mean, they've modernized their religious practices, and over time have become a lot more culturally acceptable. But the people who believed that Joseph Smith was a true prophet kind of didn't have a choice but to accept that what he had said was the truth.
Right.
And there were a lot of doctrines that my father followed that were completely taken out of the sacred texts, and he followed them and then took them to an extreme.
Right. Now, what was one of the first signs that you can remember as a child that something was really wrong? Because I know when you were a teenager, you escaped to go live with your sister Lillian. I believe, if I heard that right. But what clued you in that there's some serious problems here?
when the FBI raided our house.
That's a good sign. Yeah, that's probably a pretty big sign.
We were sent to Mexico, and then the Mexican police raided our house in Mexico. That's how you kind of know that something's up.
Yep, pretty big red flag. Yeah.
I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old. No, I was 9. I turned 10 after the Mexico raid. And so the Mexico raid happened on Halloween night.
Oh, that must have been terrifying.
Right before we didn't celebrate those kinds of holidays at all. So it wasn't like I was missing out or connecting those things.
Right.
I turned 10 the following December. And so I was 9 years old when these things were happening around me. And of course, we were told we're being persecuted because we're God's chosen people. The night that the Mexican police, the federales, raided the house in Mexico, or the apartment, it was actually an apartment in Mexico, they actually arrested Dan Jordan. And when they asked him if he was Ervil LeBaron, which is my father's name, he answered yes, and they arrested him. And my father was there and got away. And of course, everybody in my family thought that was God's protection over my father. And so they viewed that as a sign that, we were protected by God, and that he was the true prophet, which just escalated everything even further.
Definitely. Now, when talking about your father, an interesting thing to me from an early childhood perspective is that was your father, even though you had up to, what wasn't it, 48 or something siblings?
I have 50. I have 50 siblings. My father fathered 51 children, so I have 50 siblings that are blood related. And then there were probably 15 or 16 children that were brought into those marriages. Like my mother had 5 children from her previous marriage. That's one little thing we didn't talk about, was that my mother was still married to her previous husband when my father and mother were sealed for time and all eternity. So not only was Ervil practicing polygamy, my mother was practicing polyandry. No, what is the word?
Polyamory.
Polyam. I think there's a word for it, for when the wife has more than one husband at the same time. And so even though she wasn't with her previous husband anymore, she considered herself very married to my father. She was still legally married to her previous husband and stayed that way. She never divorced him. He eventually died. And so by that time, she was legally able to do whatever she wanted. But while he was alive, she was practicing. And somebody probably can put it in the comments what that word is. I even wrote it out earlier today on a little thing, and can't remember what it was.
Chat is saying it's polyandry.
Polyandry. Okay.
Yep. So that makes sense.
So, and here's the facts are that that's what Joseph Smith was doing as well. He was marrying women and being sealed to women who were already married. So, that's what happened in the case that we're all talking about today as well. Same. There's no difference in any of it. They consider it justified because of their religious beliefs.
Yep. Which are, just to point out, chat is asking, these are extremist religious beliefs. These are not traditional LDS doctrine for the modern LDS church.
For the modern church, that is correct.
Right.
And I want to make sure that is understood, that I'm not trying to conflate those two religious practices.
Yep. And we do know that, at least we have rumors that Chad and Lori were sealed while Lori was still married to Charles. He was still married to Tammy, even though he had been sealed to Tammy as well. So, yeah, they just they kind of went off the deep end with that. But
Yes,
back to
we
your
did.
story. When you were young and dealing with your father, what was your relationship like with him? Was he like
Well,
a normal dad or
no, I didn't
no?
have a relationship with him at all. I met him when I was 9 years old in Mexico.
Oh my goodness.
I met him for the first time at 9 years old.
Hmm.
So
That's
there were 2 times when I had any kind of interaction with him, which I talk about that in my book and tell about those 2 times because those were significant to me as a 9-year-old child.
I bet. How did you feel when you met him? I mean, from images that we see, I would have maybe felt a little scared.
I mean, not scared at all because we were taught that he was our father and that he loved us. And
Okay.
we were taught to live in reverence and in awe of him, that he was God's prophet and we were celestial
Mm,
children. And, that we were automatically going to the highest degree of glory into the celestial kingdom because we were celestial children born from a plural marriage, which is what was required of people to be in that celestial kingdom. And so we were celestial children. And so he was just never around. If he came and went in the middle of the night and would be closed off in the back bedroom. Sheets would be put up so that people couldn't see in. And we never saw him if he was there at the house ever until I was 9 years old in Mexico, living in that apartment that eventually the Mexican police raided.
hmm.
That was the time that I met my father and had those 2 interactions with him.
My goodness. There's a question from chat. Janet would like to know, do the LeBaron family know any of the Warren Jeffs group? As far as I know, those are completely separate groups, but was there any interaction between them?
Yes, the Warren Jeffs group, there's most people that probably have, followed any of this, the polygamist history and all the groups that are there. There's a lot of intermarrying that happens between the groups because you can only marry so many of your cousins before problems start. And that was happening in the Warren Jeffs group. But
Mm.
there's people in like one of my dad's wives, her last name was Barlow, and Barlow is a very common last name in the Warren Jeffs group. There are LeBarons that are part of the Warren Jeffs group, or were part of the Warren Jeffs group, I should say. And there's groups like this that practice polygamy all over what's known as the Mormon Corridor, which is Salt Lake City, way north in Canada, where many of them migrated when the church disavowed polygamy. And then from Salt Lake City all the way down into Mexico, which is where my family migrated, and many other families migrated. Now, one of the things that is a little fun fact is that Mitt Romney's family has also land down in Mexico, very close to the LeBaron colony. And there's a golf course between them that the Romneys and the LeBarons maintain and play golf on. So,
Yeah, that's some food for thought right there.
Mitt Romney was a modern day Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe it was his grandfather that was the practicing polygamist. So those groups are all over the Southwest United States, and again, all the way up into Canada. I mean, they're in Idaho. They're all those states going north from Salt Lake City into Canada. So many of them
intermingling. Yep,
have learned how to live undetected, and so it's common for people to find out after the fact, oh, my neighbors were polygamists, and I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I mean, just like Chad and Lori's neighbors found out things later after the fact, but being just observing them coming and going, they wouldn't have been able to guess that they were in a polygamous relationship or any of the other things that were happening surrounding them.
Yeah, I would not have expected that much interaction. But then again, comparatively, it's a small group of people who have this belief system. So just for
Mhm.
longevity, they would probably need to interact to keep their groups
Mhm.
going. So I can
Correct.
see that. Um, Back to your childhood, once the police did that raid on Halloween, what happened then as far as your awareness of things being really wrong and maybe needing to get out of there?
Well, we eventually ended up back in the United States after about a year of being separated from my mom. Then in the United States, I was living in Denver in what could only be described as slave labor. We
Mm,
were kids. There were a lot of us. My father eventually was, even though he escaped the police that one time, he was eventually arrested and put in prison. And he was charged for a murder that was carried out by one of his wives and one of his stepdaughters. And so he never actually killed anybody.
right.
It was his followers that were doing the killing. Very similar to the case that we're all talking about today.
Yeah.
Um, and so my father was in prison, and when we lived in Denver, it was his right hand man again, Dan Jordan, that was in charge of taking care of my father's children, and he didn't do a very good job of that. And we actually were put to work as slaves and worked 12-hour days with nothing but bean sandwiches on moldy bread sometimes to eat, and worked 12-hour days in our very used appliance business, which was just the girls would be put to work cleaning the used appliances, and the boys would be put to work repairing them. So they would be pulled out of school as soon as they were able to turn a wrench, and
Right.
we taught how to strip the machines, and then eventually how to repair washers and dryers, refrigerators, etc. And so they grew up just that way. People would come through the warehouse and see all of us little kids working, and I'm just surprised that nobody ever turned us in.
Right.
So eventually, with my dad in prison, um, there were some of my father's followers who were working in Houston and had their own faction of my father's cult in Houston, and they were becoming very disenfranchised with my father. He was in prison writing crazy madman letters, demanding that people come and guns a-blazing bust him out of prison, maximum
Mm,
security prison in Salt Lake City, Utah, that point of the mountain,
right.
I mean, and his followers wouldn't do it. And so, I learned all these things after, of course, because I'm still a kid, but the men were becoming disenfranchised. Even men that had followed him and thought he was a real prophet, they became disenfranchised. But because they knew too much, they couldn't actually get out. Because if you knew
Right. You
enough,
would have to be,
you got out, that put a target on your back, and you would be the next one found dead.
yep.
And so the men were disenfranchised and couldn't get out, couldn't just declare themselves, we're out of here. But they were in Houston trying to build a good life for themselves and their families. And so eventually my brother ended up there, my older brother, working alongside of them, that the ones that were disenfranchised and kind of on the fringe of the cult by then. And that brother came to Denver, and my mom packed us all up and we moved to Houston. And it was in Houston. We arrived when I was probably 11. And it was in Houston that I had the best life in this cult we had ever experienced. Mark was the leader, so to speak, of that Houston faction. And we still had to work, but they would pay us $5 a week for
Hmm.
working, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you've had nothing
Nothing.
your entire life, and then they're giving you $5 a week and taking you roller skating on Friday. Every Friday night was roller skating night. And they let you listen to secular music and take you to the dollar movies. And, you could save up your $5 and go to Marshall's and pick out a pair of Gloria Vanderbilt jeans that fit you versus the
Wow.
Goodwill boxes where you just hope that something fit halfway decent, you could go buy a pair of jeans that fit with a little white swan stitched on the pocket, and then save up your $5 again for a couple of weeks, and then go to Marshall's again and buy a pair of Nike tennis shoes, two-tone brown with the little swoosh on the side. I was, coming up on 12 years old and, feeling like pretty dang good.
Yeah.
Had my hair styled in the Farrah Fawcett way, that with those, the feathers, So, and I would go to the little beauty school that was nearby and pay $2 or $3 for a haircut. And they did the best they could with all of this hair. But there's pictures of me during that time. And the hair did not look like Farrah Fawcett's. But in my mind, it did. Yes. And so I was just feeling like this is the greatest life ever. My mom was paid for her work and she could shop for groceries in the grocery store. And we got whole milk at breakfast every day and cold cereal. Those were really big deals to me.
They were like luxury items at that point.
Luxury. My mom would, before we were all on the free lunch program, if we were enrolled in school, which free lunches at school were like the bomb diggity. I mean, I'm aging myself by saying that. But my mom would pack us a little lunch in a little brown paper bag with our name on it, with a sandwich in a baggie. In Denver, we were they closed the cafeteria down for remodeling, and that was like the saddest day of my life.
Yeah.
We couldn't get the school lunch with the whole milk. We were taking little moldy bread and bean and peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in whatever we could find, an old bread bag or an old piece of tinfoil. It was so embarrassing. And in Houston, we got a little brown paper bag with our name on it and a little baggie with Doritos, a little baggie with Oreos. And to this day, those are still some of my favorites because of the connection with feeling like a normal person for the very first time in my life. Even with just bologna and fake cheese sandwich with real fresh bread. I mean, we had a good life as far as I was concerned, and we're still in a cult. And it was because of Mark and his efforts to want to distance himself and create a life that was just a good life for people that were living in this world. Well, then my dad dies in prison. And that changed everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
So during that period where normalcy is kind of coming into your lives, how was your mother handling that? That must have been a shock for her too.
I mean, my mother was overweight most of her life. And during that period of time, I remembered she joined Weight Watchers. And I was the one who took the pictures, where they want you to have before pictures, So I was the one who took the pictures of her for her before pictures and watched her really go to those meetings every week and make the foods and buy herself the foods that she needed to eat, and watched her just trim down. And it was like the first time she'd probably ever done anything and spent money on herself.
Right.
And practiced self-care. And I got to watch that with my own two eyes, just her whole body transform right before my eyes. I remember the smell of the fish that she would cook in large quantity.
Oh, and goodness.
She did a lot of vegetables and fish.
Yep, that was Weight Watchers back then. But that's so
back in the day.
To hear that change happening of normalcy, but also the positive focus on self. That's such a big deal. Mm-hmm. And for her to have had that moment where I'm going to do this for myself, but it's also role modeling something very positive for my children, that must have felt like breaking free. Just even at that point.
It did. And then after my dad died in prison, well, guess who rolls back into town? Dan Jordan. And he comes and convinces my mother and the other wives of Ervil that Mark was leading Ervil's children on a path to hell because we got to watch movies and listen to secular music and, all that. And so I get wind that my mom is planning to go back to Denver. And of course, I'm now 12 years old with my Gloria Vanderbilt jeans and my lunches. And if you think for 1 second, I wanted to go back to the literal slave labor, I was going to use some language that probably isn't best for YouTube. HE double hockey sticks. That's what we can say. Like that was what I was going back to. And as a 12-year-old, our lives were so transient my entire life, where people were coming and going, and my older siblings being shipped off to here and there to work at different warehouses and Phoenix and Arizona, Denver, Dallas, Houston, California, all over the place. And in my mind, it was just like, oh, well, if people get shipped off to different places, why can't I just stay here? Like, I want to stay here. We have a good life here. And I don't even know how, as a 12-year-old, the idea that I could stay put came to me.
Right.
Except that we had been so mistreated and abused in Denver that there was just no draw for me. I had so many hard feelings towards Dan Jordan because he was a very abusive man, screaming and yelling at us kids. Like we're in the sweatshop working, and he comes in, we're kids, and they're screaming obscenities at us because we're not working or producing fast enough. And then, he promises if we work hard all summer, everybody will get $50 to spend on new school clothes, which would have been a really big deal.
Right.
And then doesn't come up with that at the end. And I was super salty the next week after the summer ended, and we're all in our Goodwill clothes and thrift store clothes, and his kids come in with brand new clothes to church. That was the straw for me. I mean, you weren't allowed to complain. You weren't allowed to say anything. I couldn't go and say this is not fair. How his kids didn't even have to work, hardly ever. And yet they got the new school clothes.
Right.
I want to say more naughty words.
Mm-hmm.
It's
so blatant hypocrisy under the guise of spiritual leadership. That's
yes. So when it came time, and it's almost like I'm grateful today that he didn't come through and give us those $50, because had he done that, I might not have been so salty and bitter. Like that left such a bitterness wedged deep in my soul and you couldn't complain about it. You had to just swallow it down and live with it. But it was that bitterness of soul that I felt because of the injustice that we experienced living there that caused me to go, I don't want to go back to Denver. Not this girl.
Excellent.
And I called my sister that was married to Mark. She was a half sister of mine. And I said, Lillian, I don't want to go to Denver. And she said, start walking. So I was wearing my Gloria Vanderbilt jeans and my Nike tennis shoes and walked out of my
fancy.
house.
Yeah.
So fancy with my four faucet.
So fancy. Yeah. But
walked out of my house.
That's such a brave thing. Most people, I would think, in your situation at the time, could not have made that decision. It would be terrifying.
I just feel like I had, the universe conspired to help me get out. Definitely. I wasn't even trying to get away from, I didn't even know I was in a cult.
Right.
I wasn't trying to get away. I ran away from home, but I was running to my sister's house, who was in charge in Houston. Right. It didn't feel like I was really being defiant even. Just, I want to live here where we get real soft bread to eat. And Notice it's about the food, right?
Girl just wants some blue jeans. That's all.
Nice
Gotta go
clothes
get them.
and yummy food, and I'm happy.
Yep.
Not much has changed.
Now, when you got to live with Lillian and Mark, when you arrived there, what was their perspective on it? Did they see it as a cult at that point, or were they still kind of thinking this is all okay?
They didn't think that what my dad had been doing was okay. They were on the fringe for sure, and there was very heated discussions between Mark and all the people in Houston and all the adults in Denver and all the adults in Houston, Dallas and Phoenix. And there was a lot of people killing a lot of people, trying to figure out who was going to be the next prophet.
Wasn't there a total of 28 or 25 people that were murdered in that particular scene?
There's 28 deaths confirmed
28.
and up to 38. Depending on which investigator is counting.
Oh my goodness! So that was a big deal. That was it wasn't just one or two people. It wasn't even just Chad and Lori's rampage. This was 38, up to 38 people. That's a lot of people. Oh goodness! I have a great question in chat. Something that you and I talked about before we went live. It's from Lori Shillman. She says, thank you for sharing and your encouragement and light. Have you been contacted by anyone in the legal arena as a very good expert IMO, sorts of background info for the upcoming charges for Lori and Chad?
Well, I haven't been contacted, no. If somebody did want to contact me and even just ask me some questions, I would be very happy to cooperate fully. And I want justice for Tylee and JJ just as much as everybody else. And so if there's anything that I could contribute or a perspective or anything like that, I would be very willing to do so. I'm not sure what that could possibly be, but if there is something, then I am a willing participant.
Excellent. And certainly some people may be watching this would like to reach out to you. And if you do, email me. I'll put Anna's contact info in the description. So we'll make that happen. A question from Carrie Ann. This is a great question. Can you tell us how we can spot a child that might be in a group like this? Maybe if we could recognize it, we can do something to end another group.
Well, children that are experiencing any kind of abuse, and you don't have to be born into a polygamous family or be born into a cult to experience childhood trauma, abuse, and neglect. But what you notice is that they don't give you answers when you ask them questions. They shut down. They will deflect. Most children are groomed where there's abuse happening. They are groomed and taught how to reply and how to respond in order to protect the abusers. And it's normal and natural for a child to want to protect the people that are the ones that they depend on for their very survival.
Definitely. It's a very tricky situation.
It is a very tricky situation. And the very best thing that I tell people they can do is when you see things like this happening is kindness, compassion, just unconditional love. Generally speaking, in these types of situations, there's lots of real needs that are happening for the child or for the family. And by you just meeting real felt needs, new shoes or clothes or food or whatever, those meeting those real needs and the children especially getting to see that the outside world is not wicked, evil, and vile or dark the way they've been programmed to believe. And just having people that are kind and compassionate and caring makes such a huge difference. I wrote about my teacher that was in third grade, that she didn't know anything at all, but just the way she treated me with kindness and compassion and care, it made a huge difference in my life.
Yeah. And now when we talk about like adult adults that are in cults, and you try to, maybe you have a cousin or a friend or sister in something like Nexium, and you want to get them out of it, you have to overcome a lot of programming in that situation. But when you're dealing with a child who has been raised for years and years in a situation like this, and you're coming at them with something like, I'll save you, and they're like, save me from what? That's my mom, that's my dad, that's my family. They feel ultimately threatened, and acting like that can reinforce the beliefs of the cult that they were programmed with. So you
Yes.
can actually do far more harm than good to try to rescue a child out of it, other than, like you said, approach them with like, hey, let me buy you a sandwich. You want a Happy Meal? Something like that. Earn the trust and let it develop slowly over
And,
time. But certainly
you know,
none of us should rush in and grab children and be like, come with me, I'll save you.
that's,
No.
that's just as traumatizing. I mean, the
Yes.
fact that we were raided by the police, all of those things, all those events were very traumatizing to us as children. And those people are trying to help us.
Yep.
There were many times when several of my father's children ended up in foster care for different reasons. And those events, and they talk about it with just as much trauma as being in the cult. There's not a good solution, really, when a child is young, because the parental family unit, the family of origin, is the one thing they know that's certain, that's their normal. And ripping them out of that and then putting them in foster care isn't always the greatest situation. And sometimes it's life-saving, and you just have to do it to save their very lives. And when that's necessary to save their lives, absolutely do it. But it's very traumatizing either way. And I've been through a lot of professional counseling as an adult to overcome the trauma, the abuse, and the neglect that I experienced, the abandonment. All of those things leave deep grooves cut into the mind and the soul, and the heart, that the healing of those things is just a long, long journey and a long, long process.
It's a lifetime process, really.
Yeah, there's no quick fix for it. And, I have done professional counseling for a combined 10 years, starting in 1995. And, it was 5 years with the first one, and then a couple of different ones, because, not every counselor, you don't mesh with every single one of them. So there were a few that I tried when we moved that didn't quite work out, but I was just doing my part and trying to find a good counselor that I connected with and that I felt safe with. And eventually I did find one that specializes in post-traumatic stress. I did not know that when I started working with her. And so I had been working with her for a little over a year when I decided to write my book. And because I had wanted to write the book for a long time, when I finally decided this is what I was going to do, and I went to a writer's conference and got the help that I needed and the actual real information that would help me do that. I went to her, it was January of 2014. And I went to her and I said, okay, I'm going to write the book. And she goes, okay, now my job is to make sure that you're not re-traumatized in the telling of your story.
Definitely.
And so I said, okay, so how many appointments do I get this year? Because sometimes health insurance limits your number of appointments for counseling depending on the circumstances. So I said, how many appointments do I get this year? And she goes, well, with your diagnosis, there is no limit.
Excellent. That's wonderful.
And I thought to myself, I wonder what my diagnosis is. And then I thought to myself, do I even want to know? Right. And so I asked her, I said, my diagnosis? What? I didn't know. Here I am in my mid-40s, and I don't know the name of the thing that has plagued me my entire life. And she says to me, you experience anxiety that's triggered by post-traumatic stress. And for like 1 minute, hot minute, I was very, very confused, because in my mind, post-traumatic stress is what the soldiers get.
Warriors, soldiers, yep.
And they see their buddies die. And as soon as my brain thought those things and made those connections, I thought, oh.
Suddenly it made sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And it felt like for the first time in my life, the clouds parted and the sun shone down, and I could see clearly for the first time. Having a name for it, having the diagnosis, and understanding what that feeling was in my body that I had been experiencing my whole lived life. And knowing what it was, and being able to read about it and talk to my counselor about it. And she was already teaching me tools. She specializes in post-traumatic stress. So that whole first year, she was giving me tools to use, teaching me how to breathe, teaching me about the vagus nerve, and teaching me, what to do. And she was very holistic in the way she approached it. And it was a very, it was mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. There were so many practices and things that she taught me how to do and how to manage, how to recognize when you're triggered.
Right.
So that you can begin using the tools to calm yourself, to bring yourself back to the present, because that's what a trigger does, is it just takes you right back to where you were 7 years old, on the driveway, begging your mom not to leave you, And she taught me the tools that I needed to be able to identify a trigger and then literally talk myself back into my present day body.
Yeah.
And that was very significant.
Yeah. And that's why I say this is a lifelong journey. Because even from my experience with an abusive relationship, I was diagnosed with CPTSD, complex post-traumatic distress disorder. And a lot of it is just learning how to cope with those triggers. They never really go away.
Right.
I can still get triggered by any number of strange things I didn't even see coming. But the therapy was learning how to stop it in its tracks before it takes over your life. And it's a very challenging thing to do. Now, the healing process, like, it never stops. But what do you find one of the most cathartic things that you have done? I would think writing your book would have been a huge release for you. Did you find it to be that? Or was it upsetting and triggering?
Well, it was triggering to actually do the writing. However, I was in her care the entire time that I was writing the book, and even afterwards. So the writing of it, it's what's known as externalizing your story, where you tell somebody your story, or you write it, or you journal it. It doesn't have to be written like for publication or for public consumption. It can be written in a way that in your journal where you get to say what happened and name names and call it what it was. That is extremely powerful in the healing process. So anybody that's listening that has experienced any kind of abuse, externalizing your story, whether you're telling a friend over a cup of coffee, or a mentor, a counselor, a therapist, any type of clergy or pastoral type person that is a safe person. There's being a safe person is the key. Somebody that will listen to your story, and that will, I call it just like holding your story once you tell it, and they hold it right between you very tenderly. And then don't use that against you.
Right. That's the biggest thing. They won't use it against you as a weapon later on.
Yes.
And
so
I've been through
find your
that.
safe people and tell your story. You get to say what happened and name names. Annie Lamont, there's a quote that I love from her. She says, if people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better.
Yes.
And
And, that's an experience. That's a real experience.
Yeah. If people want you to talk warmly about them, they should have behaved better. But also the other half of that equation is Brene Brown, who I love. She's an author that has helped me tremendously. She says, tell your story to people who have earned the right to hear your story. So,
Definitely.
I've been telling my story since 2007. You doing Q&As, all of this. I tell the parts of my story that I choose to tell. There are parts of my story that are not for public consumption. Those are meant for long talks into the night with my siblings and other very trusted people.
Right.
Everybody doesn't need to know every single thing. Now, when I was in counseling, a lot of that dark stuff came out in counseling. But you tell your story to people who have earned the right to hear your story.
Yep.
That is the qualifier. Like, I'm sitting here telling my story to a lot of internet strangers on the YouTube, but I'm choosing which parts of my story to tell and which parts are mine that aren't for public consumption.
Right.
And that's
you're always in control of that.
Yeah. And knowing which part you're ready to tell and which part you're healed enough to tell. And it's important to be healed enough to tell your story if you're going to do it in a public manner, because that itself is it can be very traumatizing. If you notice, like, if we later get into something, if my neck turns red, don't be worried about me, because it's an emotional thing for me to talk about it. But that emotion that I express, and that shows up as redness on my neck sometimes. You can see a little bit over here. Already started. That just tells you that I've healed enough to be able to express emotion. When you're growing up in a cult in an abusive situation, you are taught to suppress all of your negative emotions, and you don't get to feel them, and you don't get to say them, and you don't get to complain about them, for sure. And so the fact that I've been through enough counseling that I now can tell my story and have the healthy boundaries about which parts of my story I tell and which parts of my story are private, that itself is a sign of somebody who's healthy and ready to be able to speak publicly about their story.
Definitely. And it's a big decision, and it's a game changer when you reach that point in your recovery process. So, a question from chat.
I'm not recommending that people go out and go on YouTube and start telling all of their stories when they haven't had counseling and therapy and professional help to heal.
Yep. I spent about 10 years before I started actually telling my story. And I'm still not finished telling it because I ran into a point where I hit that wall. I'm like, I'm not ready for the next part yet. And my podcast has sat there for almost 8 months now because I'm not ready for the next part. And that's perfectly okay.
I was interviewed how you got to do it podcast today where I told parts of my story that 5 years ago I wasn't ready to tell. So,
yep. You got to trust that little voice inside. It knows. Now, unfortunately, I've been monopolizing you and not taking the questions from chat, but there are some good questions. So I want to jump into those. I apologize to everyone in chat. From Austin James, do you worry about revenge or retribution from people still in any of the groups?
My father's group disbanded and burned itself to the ground. Literally, everybody that was wanting to kill anybody was either killed or went to prison. It disbanded, and there's nobody in my father's group that believes he was any kind of prophet. And all of his children that survived, and because not all of them did, and that are living their lives outside of prison, have moved on and changed their lives. And we've overcome the trauma that we experienced. And most of them have gone on to just live really normal, good lives of character and values. And I have so many of my siblings that, one of my sisters graduated from Cornell University. Others have master's degrees in engineering, doing really good things in the world and making the world a better place. And I'm just very proud of my family, of my siblings especially, who have overcome every obstacle, huge obstacles that were put in their way just by being born into this family. And all of us are out. And that is my hope and prayer and best wish for people that are born into or get sucked into these types of very toxic cults and born into very toxic families, is that they will see the light that's outside of their current circumstances and the love and the care that's out there, and then just make their way towards the light that's out here. And all these beautiful people out here in this big, beautiful world that came alongside and helped and did what they could. And I mean, I didn't get to this place by myself.
Right.
And I have a lot to be grateful for, and my family for sure. The ways that we have overcome, and, for the people that are still involved, the Warren Jeffs group, even just Chad Daybell's children and Lori's older son and the family members that remain. It's my best wish that they will be able to move on once this has been put to rest, and find ways to live their lives with kindness and love and all of the peace that they can possibly gather around them.
Definitely. One question that you kind of just hit on that we get a lot. A lot of people still argue about, was Chad's group a cult? Was it a cult? And certainly you, having survived an offshoot LDS extremist cult, would be able to make that determination, I think. So what do you think when we get that question? Was Chad's group a cult or
I
not?
think it was an emerging cult.
Mm-hmm.
Had they not started killing people, it would have become a cult for sure. They were already gathering people. There were already people believing in him, that he was the prophet. And that is him calling himself the prophet was the marker that you're looking for, where they're now the leader and everybody else needs to fall in line.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think of, I don't know how well versed you are in like the broader group that Chad operated in, but it's a group of prophets. They all call themselves the prophets, the visionaries. They all have these prophecies that they're spewing on their forums all day long. And I got the impression that they were vying for top prophet, similar to your experience. We have this group where everyone's fighting to be the prophet of this group. And somehow Chad, with the charisma of a potato, got elected. Yeah, any idea how that might have come about? Because that baffles me.
He did elect himself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. True. They can call themselves whatever they want to call themselves. And it's just a matter of, are there people who believe that he is, and will they follow him? These groups, many of them, operating from the place of instilling fear over the end times and, the what's going to happen, and, the apocalypse and the destructions coming. All of them operate from a place of putting fear into people, and they control people by using fear. And so those are telltale signs. If you're triggered and anxious and thinking that if you don't have enough food or water stored up for the apocalypse and the end times, if that is triggering conversation for you, you can know for sure that you have experienced spiritual abuse.
Definitely. And what do you think of, as far as Chad's beliefs and the Church of the Firstborn's belief, is there any crossover with this dark and light spirit thing that Chad seems to push so heavily? Because I've not heard that from like LDS scripture or doctrine. I have no idea where Chad came up with that idea.
I think they just called it different things. Like, and from my father's perspective, that a dark person would have been called a son of perdition or a daughter of perdition. So they're calling it different things. That is the only difference. The effect of it is this long trail of dead people in their wake, where it's justified in their mind. Their doctrine about multiple mortal probations. My mom, after my father's group, completely disbanded, my mom found another polygamist group to join. And in that group, they were teaching multiple mortal probations. And what I understand from going down the rabbit hole of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow is that they believed that they were helping the person along to their next probation. And it was a kindness they were doing to them. Right. And in my father's cult, it wasn't called multiple mortal probations. It was called blood atonement. Right. And they justified the murders of the people based on doing them a kindness and helping them get to the celestial glory. Because if they had denounced the truth that they knew was true, then they were a son of perdition and they had to die. The blood atonement was in a nutshell that there are some sins that the blood of Christ can't cover. And therefore you have to shed your own blood in order to not be held accountable for that in the next life. So it was really a kindness that you were doing. And that's they are calling it just different things. That's all. The only difference. The effect of it is the same. People are dead.
And I think we're going to hear that as part of Chad and Lori's defense. That belief that the children were dark spirits or zombies, as they fancifully called them. Yeah. And they had to do this to save their everlasting soul. Right. So they were being kind, doing the right thing, being good parents. My God. But right. I really think that's going to be part of the defense.
Backwards. That's a telltale sign when everything is just backwards.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think I can say that on YouTube.
It works.
I'm trying to be respectful of the audience.
When we're looking at, I'm watching chat to see if any more questions are coming. When we're looking at extremist religious leaders, and how easily, we've seen cults all throughout history, even from, Babylonian times. There have been cults that have sprung up with people pushing the fear angle and selling their hope in order to build their cults. What are a few hallmarks that you can point out of people who may encounter leaders like this and to shy away from them or run as fast as they can, rather?
Well, when people are dying left and right, that's one reason to run. But generally, once you know that there are people that have died, it's almost too late to get out. And so when you have information that you can go to law enforcement with, you are a target.
Yep, you're in trouble.
And that is one of the hallmarks of my father's cult, was that once you knew too much, it's like the mafia. You know too much, you're in, and there's no getting out. So Another one would be when there's a person or persons who have all the control and you get none. And when you find yourself in a situation where you don't have a voice or a choice, a real voice and a real voice. My mom was big about talking about agency. And that you have your free agency and that God gave us free agency. However, growing up in a polygamous cult, we were told we had free agency, but we really didn't. When you were, especially if you were a girl, you were married off to these older men that at age 14, 15, 16 years old, you did not get a real choice or a real voice, because there's no 16-year-old girl who wants to marry some 40, 50-year-old gross old man. Yeah. I promise that. Unless you're brainwashed, you're not choosing a 50-year-old man as your husband who already has 14 other wives. That's just not natural.
No, it is not.
So when they have all the power and you have none, that's how you can know. When you're asked to hide, or when you're asked to lie, when you're asked to keep things secret, when you know in your gut there's a problem, trust your gut. When people are fabricating things left and right to cover, and you know it's a fabrication, trust your gut.
What about financial abuse? In many cults, we see the leaders abuse their followers financially by taking all of their money. Was that something that happened in this situation as well?
Of course, yes. That is why I eventually got out, was the financial abuse that Dan Jordan was perpetrating on all of Ervil LeBaron's wives and children, and even some of his own. There's always a pecking order in every group, even if it's just your third grade class on the recess playground. There's a pecking order. That's just human nature to create that. And in these groups, the polygamous families, there's a pecking order, and it's usually the first wife who has all the power over the other ones. In my father's, it was a little bit different. So usually the first wife is the favorite wife, although all the wives usually try to convince themselves that they're the favorite. Now that infighting it's real, it's ugly. My mom, in a very weak moment one time, told me polygamy is hell.
Oh.
And all the people that get out and write their books, many people have probably read a bunch of them, can tell. And when you're being silenced and told to lie or gaslit and told that what you're experiencing is an abuse, and it is, trust your gut. Trust your gut. Trust your instincts. Your instincts have been there for you, and you can kind of quiet them down by not listening to them. But in this age of information, where people have access to information like podcasts, and they get to hear people telling their story and bringing these kinds of things into the light. That is powerful, because there might be somebody listening that's in an abusive situation or in a toxic family or whatever, and just hearing one person speak generally isn't like, okay, now I get to break free and I'm done. Getting out, getting away is a process, and you need help. You need somebody on the outside. Yes. You need support. You need people who are going to help you when you're on the outside. In polygamous families, there are organizations now that help people with finding a job, getting a car, first down payment on an apartment, education, counseling, all of the things that they are going to need. When I got out, when I was 13 in the early 80s, those things were not available to me. So I went from the early 80s to 1995 before I was able to see a professional counselor. And by that time, I was a grown adult, had children of my own.
Sorry, Kat. One thing about getting out of relationships like this, even in a personal domestic abuse type relationship, leaving, you can't just up and leave. Like you said, it's not a simple process. You do need help. You need a plan. You need to do it sort of under the cover of night, so you don't alert people to what you're doing. It's very tricky. So it's good to hear that there are places that you can reach out to for help. The one that I always promote is the National Domestic Abuse Hotline. But what organizations do you know of, any offhand, that would support somebody coming out of a cult type situation?
For the polygamists, for sure. Like there's an organization called Holding Out Help, that in the help is H, capital H, dot, capital E, dot, capital L, capital P. They are located in Salt Lake City, and they help people coming out of polygamous families. There are other organizations that also provide those kinds of services. There are so many books that I've read that have been helpful to me in my healing journey. This is a brand new one. I'm going to show it. This is written from a Christian perspective. For those people who aren't really wanting the Christian's perspective, this would not be a great option unless you wanted to just read around that. But look at this.
Excellent.
And this is how I know that this lady understands. I'm trying to make it, but it's backwards. I hope people can read it. But this is how I know she understands abuse. She made this cover reversible. so that you can actually reverse the cover, and this is not what's on the front anymore. And that way
because you
can
wouldn't
read
want to read that in front of someone that you were reading it about. Yeah, exactly.
If you are wanting a resource that is not faith-based, there's a book called The Betrayal Bond that I think it's Patrick Carnes is the author. It's been revised and updated, and it's one of the very best resources that I found that helped me really understand what was happening inside of me, so that I could identify the gaps that I had in my growth and do the things. And they give you the steps on how to break away and what to do and the path to follow to get out. And then there's another resource called Healing for Hidden Abuse, because not all abuse leaves marks and scars on the body.
Right.
There are so many types of abuse, psychological, emotional, verbal, that leave marks and scars on the spirit, on the soul, on the heart. And those can remain untreated for so long because they're not visible.
Right. And a lot of, especially one of the things that we've just seen in, like in the UK, they've made narcissistic abuse actually a legal thing now. Where before, I mean, even here in the United States, if you go to say, well, I was involved with a narcissist and it was abusive, well, where's the pictures? It's like,
right.
No, it's not like that, And so having that brought into the sphere of law enforcement, saying, hey, this is a real thing. It's very important, because certainly if you're in a cult situation or a personal one-on-one domestic violence, abusive situation, you need to have an understanding with law enforcement that this really is a form of abuse. And the damage for me mentally was much more lasting than a bruise or a cut.
Right. Yeah.
And we need to see it that way.
Another person that helped me grow and let go of the shame of the family of origin that I was born into was Brene Brown. I quoted her earlier. All of her books are helpful. Her book, Daring Greatly, was incredibly helpful to me. Her book, Rising Strong, also incredibly helpful. Her earlier two books, also great. One called I Thought It Was Just Me. And then I can't remember the name of the last one. It left my mind. I'll think of it. But Brene Brown has been incredibly helpful. If you want to just get a taste of what her books are about, you can watch her TED Talk on YouTube.
Oh, excellent.
She has one of the top 10 most watched TED Talks of all time. And it's all about shame and vulnerability. And so you can just go and watch that and get a little taste of her message. And then I hope that people who that resonates with will just get these resources. You don't even have, sometimes if you don't have the funds, you can check them out from your library. If you've never used Audible, you can get one book for free on Audible, as long as you remember to cancel your membership before they charge your credit card. So I want to help people get resources in their hands where it doesn't cost them a lot. Most of these books are just best-selling books and are available in thrift stores and used stores and on Amazon used. I mean, obviously it helps authors when you buy their book brand new, but if that's not an option for you, libraries are a great source for resources that can help you.
And after the live, I'll go back and get all of the links for all of the books that you've mentioned and get them in the description for anyone who might be interested.
That's a long TBR stack I just made
a long list.
People that are interested in, pursuing healing, and pursuing growth. And the main thing that I want to say is that you can heal from trauma, abuse, neglect, and abandonment. It's possible to heal. And it's a long journey, and it's one that nobody can take except you. Yeah. Nobody can choose it for you. This is something you have to choose for yourself. And practicing self-care. This, just getting a book from the library and reading a page or two a day, is a huge form of self-care. getting a notebook from like a 10-cent notebook. It's almost back to, it's going to be, notebooks are on sale. You can get a 10-cent notebook and begin journaling and help yourself incredibly by externalizing your story and using these resources to begin to take the steps toward your freedom and you becoming the person, the incredible, beautiful person that you were meant to be.
And also, you don't have to go it alone.
Right.
That's my biggest message to the world. You're not crazy. You're not alone. People will get you, and find those people, and they'll help you through every step of the way.
I mean, I'm on social media everywhere, and if you want to just private message me your story, I get a lot of messages, so I can't respond to everyone, but I read every single one. If you want to just tell your story, you're welcome to do that.
Definitely. Austin James says, you can be married and still be emotionally abandoned and abused. Yes, you can. Yeah, it's not actually a question. So I apologize for that. Words and actions will kill your soul and break your heart and will. That's right. Words and actions can hurt just as much as being punched or kicked or anything else.
Yes.
That is very true. So one thing, I mean, I could talk to you for hours because there's so many more details about Anna's story that we didn't get to tonight, but she does have a book. And there's a link in the description. The mods have been linking it in chat, so you can just scroll up and find a link to it. It's called The Polygamist Daughter. And I am so impressed because even telling my little story, which was one person that I interacted with, not an entire family, not a internationally known cult. I was terrified just to write that one, just do my little podcast. So the fact that you had found the fortitude and the bravery and the strength to come out with that entire story is, I don't know, I'm mind blown. I am so in awe of you. And I'm so impressed that I don't know, you've really taken this and turned it into, all right, this is my life. That was my life. But look how good I'm doing. It's so much strength. A lot of people would have just collapsed under that, but you found a way to heal through it. And now you're inspiring other people to heal as well. And if we all do a little bit more of that, I think we'll have a much better world to live in.
And the main thing is just to not think you have to figure it all out in a day. If you take one little tiny baby step, the universe conspires. And it's like getting on a moving sidewalk at the airport. You have to take steps, and sometimes you can just stand there and you'll move along as long as you step on that moving sidewalk. But you can step along and take steps and get to the end of that a lot faster if you do the work that you can do. But you just taking those steps is the thing that is required from you. Because that's what I've learned is people who are stuck are not willing to take the steps.
Right.
And one, it's because they don't have they're like locked in fear. And fear is the controlling factor that is keeping them stuck. And just one brave step, just ordering the book from your library, making an appointment with a counselor, making an appointment with a mentor or a friend to have coffee and saying, this is what happened. And naming names and saying what happened is incredible. It's so powerful when it's brought into the light.
Yeah, and the tiniest action like that will have a ripple effect that can change your life. So definitely.
And if you decide to just journal because you're not ready to tell anybody what happened, just writing a few pages. Generally speaking, this has been my experience. When you journal and you're just using, learning the practice, it can take a few days to make it kind of where it's becoming effective. Generally, once you get kind of good at writing down your thoughts and what's happening in your day and all that, it's helpful to write about your day and that you went to McDonald's or who you met and the friends and your plans and this and that. And then once you get used to that, after a page or two of writing about your day, all of a sudden the good stuff starts coming out through your pen. But it is a practice. And it's something that if you haven't been used to journaling or writing your thoughts, it just takes practice. And you just taking out a notebook, writing the date, and saying what you did that day and who you met for lunch is a way to begin.
It snowballs. You take that first step and it will snowball. Absolutely.
And when that's your intention, is freedom.
Yes.
On the other side, and wholeness, and what Brene Brown calls wholeheartedness. That is the thing that you have in your mind, and you're pursuing it, and you take the littlest, slightest step in the right direction. It's like getting on that moving sidewalk.
Now, speaking of wholeheartedness, Kresha, who I believe you know, JJ's aunt, she is here in chat, and she is wholeheartedly asking me to ask you something. So I better before she comes for me. I love Kresha, but I'm a little scared of her. I love you, Kresha. I'm just teasing. Kresha wants to know, do you know of your dad having or experiencing near-death experiences?
I mean, my dad had experiences where he had things happen to him, weird things. He got revelations. I don't know about near death, but near arrest, and then all of a sudden arrest. And then, my dad never ever in his mind thought that he would be convicted of anything. And there he was. He'd never pulled the trigger on anyone. And he was tried and convicted and sentenced to life in prison. And he did not see that coming, because in his mind, he was God's prophet. And he literally got crazier and crazier and wrote crazier and crazier and crazier things in prison. I have what he calls the Book of the New Covenant, which printed out on regular 8.5 by 11 pages is like this tall.
Goodness.
Writings of a madman. Because he didn't see it coming. He, in his mind, was absolutely God's prophet. And the world, in all of its, the world had different things to say about that. And I'm glad they did. I'm glad that my father was arrested. I'm glad that he was tried and convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He died in prison under very mysterious circumstances. And I'm glad he did, because it set the rest of us free.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad that you only met him twice, to be honest.
For sure.
I had a vision of you maybe having daily interactions, be like, well, that's my dad. He loves me, and coming to terms with that. That would have just made it monstrously more difficult.
I mean, I did have to, the first 5 years I spent in counseling was all about reconciling the fact that I grew up fatherless.
Which is traumatic in its own right. Been there myself. We have so many common t-shirts. We just started a t-shirt club. Let's do it.
Like I said, you don't have to be born into a polygamous cult to experience the kinds of things that I went through and to have my story resonate with yours. It's just, the polygamy was just this real salacious detail that just really made my life a lot more difficult. But trauma is trauma. Abuse is abuse. Neglect is neglect. Abandonment is abandonment. No matter what what's happening around those events that are happening to people, the effects of them are the same. The effects of them are long-term.
So for everyone watching in chat or who may watch the replay, if you've suffered this sort of trauma and abuse in your life, please understand you're not alone. There are resources available. Check the description and, come hang out. Reach out to Anna. Reach out to me. There are a lot of people who understand. And we can't heal you, but we can hold your hand as you go through it. And we'll absolutely do that.
Kresha, you are welcome to reach out to me in any way that you find comfortable. You are welcome to. And if you have questions for me that are more private in nature, I would be more than happy to connect with you and serve you in any way. My heart is with you. My heart is with your family.
And as far as Kresha goes, she's sending me some jambalaya. So hooking up with Kresha is a good idea.
I mean, you can't be sorry and sad about that, I'm saying. But just know that my heart, my prayers, and my best wishes are with you and your family, and with all of the survivors that are literally, their world has just been turned upside down. And, I hope that you'll find a lot of light and love in the world as people are processing all of these things that are happening right here in the news. I mean, you have my heart.
They do. And look at the community that has sprouted up as a result of this case. And you mentioned Kresha and Kay and Larry, and everyone's heart just absolutely melts. We would want to envelop this family in love and light and peace and healing. And that's what we're all here to do, to get justice for these kids and everyone else involved, because it's a big thing. But as this trial goes forward, I believe that the LDS aspect of it is going to come into play in a big way. So maybe at a later time, if you could come back and talk to us more about the actual religious doctrine and everything, and how it might play into what we're going to see in the trial, because there are going to be so many questions, especially because Chad himself mentioned Church of the Firstborn. It's like, oh, here we go.
I mean, just that name by itself, that name is in their sacred text, which is why my uncle chose it as the name of his church. And so that is common. That is language that's common in their sacred texts. And so I will absolutely be willing to come back and talk again, and bring what I know and what I've experienced and what I've learned, and see how this can be beneficial to helping people understand the mindset of the people who are involved in all of this, because that is the important piece that may not even come out in the trial, just because those kinds of things become problematic in a trial like that, when all you need is that conviction. Bringing in all of these other things can just distract from the facts and from the evidence that they have. And so these kinds of things may not be brought up in the trial. And if that's the route that the prosecutor needs to go in order to get a conviction, I'm all for it. But in the meantime, we can be over here on YouTube talking about all of it if we want to.
Definitely. So it's very interesting to see how the two worlds have crossed over. I tend to really focus on the narcissistic abuse, but now we've got this case, and now we've got a cult, and we've got the religious stuff, and it all turns into this boiling pot of toxic craziness. So whenever we can sit down and talk to people and say, hey, let's shed a little light on this. Let's bring the temperature down, and let's realize we're all together and we're going to be okay. We got this. Yeah. So that was so wonderful. It was great to talk to you. Hopefully we'll get to keep talking more, because I don't know, I adore you. I think you're fantastic. You're so lovely. Your energy, not to get all mystical or anything, but your energy is so warm and enveloping and healing. And I don't know, I'm buzzing right now. I'm like, yeah, this is great. So it's a healing energy.
I will say that each time I have an opportunity to tell my story, it is part also of my healing journey. And so now all of the people who are listening, or who listen to the replay, are part of my healing journey. So thank you all. Thank you all for this opportunity, because each time I tell my story, it is a little bit more wholeheartedness that I get to experience as a result.
That's wonderful. All right, so hopefully all of you through the internet can feel this wonderful energy of healing and light, and we're going to move forward, get justice for these kids. Please pick up Anna's book. There's a link in the description. I can't wait to dig into it. I purposely did not read it because I wanted to talk to you sort of fresh and without knowing all the details, because I like doing interviews more that way. So now I'm going to go read the book and get all the details, and then I'll be like, I have so many questions.
And for people who are interested in that, I mean, there's a whole stack of books, tall stack of books written about my family, where all the salacious stuff gets talked about, all the polygamy and the murders and all of that gets talked about. A lot of books. However, the book that was missing was one written from the perspective of the child born and raised in that. And that's the way I wrote my book. I wanted, if I didn't know, my reader doesn't know it. When I find out things, that's when my reader finds out. And so that's the perspective that you can expect when you read it, if you decide to. And then if you want to know who did what, when, why, and where, and there's a lot of other books. There's even a made for TV movie, I guess, that was put out on CBS in 1993 that you can now watch in its entirety on YouTube. It's called Prophet of Evil. And I will say that it's not suitable for children. Absolutely not suitable for children. It's very, all of things that my father was responsible for are covered in that. There's horrifying scenes that will, if you are sensitive, or, you know, there's definitely a trigger warning that I would attach to that. But it's available. It's horribly made. It's made for TV, 1993. So keep all that in mind.
Yeah.
And then there's also my interview with Dr. Oz that's also available on YouTube. You can watch it in its entirety. Just Google or YouTube, search my name and Dr. Oz, and it'll pop right up for you. So I get to tell my story from my perspective, and all the other people get to tell theirs too that want to. There's a documentary that I did for the Reels channel about my life, and I think you pay a couple of bucks to be able to watch that on the Reels channel if you're not a subscriber. But there's a lot of, you just Google my name, there's out there that I've put out there just for free. And so, but all these things are available, and also you can connect with me if that will be helpful to you.
Definitely. And one of my mods suggested maybe we're going to use your book for a book club. That I think would be fascinating. And then we will have a billion questions by the time we get finished with that. Like, Anna, help me with questions.
I've been to a lot of book clubs, some of them by Zoom if they're not in my same city. I've actually gone to book clubs right here in my town. And when people choose the book, I will Zoom or Skype in, or however it works, you know, technology. But going to those is just one of my favorite things because it's open-ended. People have read the book, and, you know, those conversations can last for a long time.
Yeah, they can.
So if anybody wants to do a book club, connect with me and let's figure out how to do a Q&A with your book club. That would be fun for me.
Yep, I think we're going to be setting that up tomorrow. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Chat was super respectful tonight, and I'm so happy to see that. What a wonderful chat conversation that was happening over there. I'm so glad to have had Anna here. I'm honored to be here. And to the mods, thank you. I know all of you showed up tonight because we were expecting maybe some problems with, you know, we talk about cults, you get some crazy chat, but chat was beautiful. So thanks to everyone for all the hard work in making this happen. Thank you for all the super chats. I didn't acknowledge them as we we're going because I wasn't going to interrupt Anna. Don't be mad at me for that. I was being respectful to our guest, but I saw them and thank you very much. So we have some work to do. We're going to get the book club going because I think we all want to read this book now very badly. So, but thank you for being here.
If you want me to answer your questions, if you have questions that you want to just put it in the comments, I'll do a little at a time as I go in the next days and hopefully get to your questions.
Excellent. Yeah, she was breaking up a little bit there, but what she said, if you have any questions for Anna, leave them down in the comments, and she'll be able to go through and answer them for you. So there you go. Thank you so much for being so accessible to everyone. That's just amazing. And we are all truly honored to have you here tonight. So thanks, guys. I'll be in touch with you soon. You know how to reach me. I will get some contact information for Anna and put it also in the description, so you'll have everything you need. All right, and I'm sure we will get to talk again at some point.
Well, thank you, Awen. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm so glad to meet you and to get to have everyone else meet you too now. So that was great. All right, guys, I will talk to you soon, and I'll see you all in Discord. You can reach me over there, and have a great Easter weekend. Blessed Easter to everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Find my end broadcast button.